So, I'd like to give you an insight into the power of hypnosis over the years, a trip through hypnotic history, a story that has shaped the hypnotherapy industry. Its origins, the opinions, the theories, and the sheer power of this mind body influence that has captured the fascination of so many since ancient times, all the way through history to today. The history of hypnosis is a fascinating journey from divine magic to clinical science. It's a story of how we slowly realized that the magic wasn't in the magnets, but in the incredible power of the human mind. The roots of hypnosis stretch back to ancient Egypt. Archaeologists have discovered papyrus scrolls describing sleep temples, where the sick would travel to be cured by the gods. Patients were put into a temple sleep, likely a state of deep trance, enhanced by rhythmic chanting and incense. While in this state, priests would whisper suggestions of healing into the patient's ears, claiming the gods were performing the work. This is the earliest recorded use of therapeutic suggestion. By the Renaissance, the focus shifted from gods to the invisible forces of nature. Paracelsus in the 1500s was a Swiss physician and alchemist who used magnets to treat various ailments, including syphilis. He believed that the human body had its own magnetic poles and that external magnets could pull the disease out of the body. In the 1600s, we had Valentine Greatrakes, also known as the Irish Stroker. Greatrakes claimed he could heal people by stroking them with his hands. He believed he possessed a divine gift, but in reality it was probably his charismatic presence and the physical touch that was inducing a proto-hypnotic state in his patients. In the 18th century, Father Maximilian Hell, a Jesuit priest and astronomer, refined the use of magnets for healing. He shaped steel plates to fit the contours of the human body and applied them to patients to balance their internal fluids. One of Hell's most attentive students was a young Viennese physician named Franz Anton Mesmer. Mesmer took Hell's ideas back to Vienna and evolved them into a sensation. He believed a subtle physical fluid filled the universe and connected everything, a theory he called animal magnetism. Mesmer's early work was literal. He would frequently open a patient's wound, allow it to bleed, and then pass a magnet over it. Miraculously, the bleeding would stop. Then came the accidental discovery that changed everything. One day, while treating a patient, Mesmer realized he had forgotten his magnet. He picked up a simple wooden stick, passed it over the wound, and to his shock, the bleeding stopped anyway. Mesmer concluded that the magnetic fluid was actually coming from him, not the metal. We now recognize this as a non-verbal suggestion. His presence and the ritualistic movements, now called mesmeric passes, were inducing a trance state that triggered the body's autonomic nervous system to restrict blood flow. By the late 1700s, Mesmer had moved to France and was the talk of Paris. Anyone who was anyone would visit Mesmer, but because he couldn't see every patient individually, he created the baquet, a large wooden tub filled with magnetized water and iron filings. Patients held onto protruding iron rods to absorb the fluid. The medical establishment was skeptical. In 1784, King Louis XVI appointed a royal commission to investigate. The panel was a who's who of Enlightenment science. Firstly, we had Antoine Lavoisier, who was the father of modern chemistry. Alongside him, Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotin, the physician and namesake of the guillotine. And lastly, Benjamin Franklin, the American polymath and diplomat. They conducted blind tests, showing that patients only reacted when they thought they were being magnetized. They concluded there was no fluid, only imagination. A discredited Mesmer retreated to Vienna, where his techniques survived in smaller circles until as late as 1985. However, the trance state he induced remained a fascination, often called somnambulism. James Braid was a skeptical Scottish surgeon who attended a demonstration by a traveling mesmerist named Charles Lafontaine. Unlike the critics of the time, Braid didn't think it was a fake. He noticed that the subjects truly couldn't open their eyes. Braid hypothesized that this state wasn't caused by a fluid, but by sensory fatigue. He experimented on his own family, asking them to stare at the neck of a wine bottle or a silver lancet case held just above the line of vision. He realized that upward staring exhausted the levator muscles of the eyelids and the optic nerve. This fatigue caused the brain to slip into a different state of consciousness. He coined the term neurohypnotism, nervous sleep. He later realized that sleep was a misnomer and the person was actually hyper-focused, so he tried to change it to monoideism, focus on one idea. However, the idea and name hypnosis had already captured the public's imagination. In 1843, Braid published Neurohypnology. This was the first scientific book on the subject. He stripped away the ritual and the magnets, proving that fixation on a single point was the key to induction. So, whilst Braid was defining the theory in Scotland, a Scottish surgeon called Dr. James Esdale was putting it to the ultimate test in Calcutta, India. Now, this was the era before chemical anesthesia, and medical surgery was a screaming, bloody nightmare with a high mortality rate from shock. Esdale had read about mesmerism and began applying it to his patients, mostly labourers undergoing massive surgeries, like the removal of 80-pound tumours or leg amputations. In an era where the surgical death rate was roughly 50%, mostly due to the shock to the nervous system from pain, Esdale's mortality rate plummeted to an astonishing 5%. Esdale performed over 500 major operations and thousands of minor ones using only mesmeric sleep. Because he didn't know Braid's fast methods, Esdale used the old mesmeric passes, physically stroking the patient for hours until they reached a state of profound anesthesia, now known as the Esdale state, or the hypnotic coma. Despite Esdale's incredible success, two things hindered the progress of hypnosis within the medical field in the 1850s. Ether and chloroform were discovered. They were faster and easier for doctors to administer than spending hours magnetizing a patient. The medical establishment in London hated Esdale's reports. They claimed the Indian patients liked pain or were faking it, simply because the doctors couldn't explain how it worked without the fluid theory. So whilst Braid gave us the science, fixation, and suggestion, it was Esdale that gave us the grounding, proof that the mind can completely eradicate physical pain. Together, they moved hypnosis out of the parlor and into the operating theatre. In 1866, Ambroise Auguste Liébault opened a clinic in Nancy, France. He famously cured a patient's sciatica overnight, a patient who had been unsuccessfully treated by the renowned French physician Hippolyte Bernheim. Bernheim was so impressed he joined Liébault to form the Nancy School of Hypnosis, focusing on the power of suggestion rather than physical magnets. Bernheim himself increasingly turned from hypnosis to the use of suggestion in a waking state. In 1886, he adopted Hack-Tuke's term psychotherapeutic action, and in 1891, he used the term psychotherapy in the title of book as a synonym for his suggestive therapeutics. In 1885, a certain gentleman called Sigmund Freud traveled to Paris to study under Jean-Martin Charcot at the Salpêtrière Hospital. Charcot used hypnosis to demonstrate that hysteria was a neurological condition. Later, Freud visited the Nancy School to observe Liébault and Bernheim. He was deeply impressed by their ability to use simple verbal suggestion to cure physical ailments. He returned to Vienna convinced that the unconscious held the key to neurosis. The split on opinions between the Salpêtrière school, who viewed hypnosis through a strictly medical lens, stating that hypnosis was a pathological state, a physical manifestation of hysteria, where the rival Nancy school viewed hypnosis as a mental process related to everyday sleep and focus. They argued the entire phenomenon was caused by suggestion and was all about the subject's belief in the hypnotist's words. History ultimately sided with the Nancy school. After Charcot died, it was revealed that many of his famous hysterical patients at the Salpêtrière had simply learned to mimic the physical symptoms he expected to see. This shift in thinking from physical nerves to the power of the mind is what eventually allowed Sigmund Freud to move away from biology and create psychoanalysis. Freud began working with Joseph Breuer, an Austrian physician who made discoveries in neurophysiology, was the first to demonstrate the role of the vagus nerve and changed the way scientists considered the relationship of the lungs to the nervous system. Together, Freud and Breuer treated a famous patient, Anna O., the pseudonym given to Bertha Pappenheim by Breuer while she was his patient. In his descriptions of her as a case study, she was a woman suffering from paralysis of her limbs and a temporary loss of sensation or awareness, as well as disturbances of vision and speech. Breuer would hypnotize the patient and have her talk back to the origin of the symptoms. He discovered that when a suppressed memory was verbalized under hypnosis, the physical symptom often vanished. While Breuer was comfortable with the emotional intensity of hypnosis, Freud began to feel uneasy with the mystical and unpredictable nature of the trance state. Freud officially moved away from hypnosis in the late 1890s, replacing it with free association. His stated and unstated reasons included an incident where a female patient, upon waking from a trance, threw her arms around his neck in a fit of affection. Freud attributed this to transference, the patient shifting feelings for a significant figure onto the doctor. He found this emotional volatility difficult to manage and felt hypnosis made the patient too dependent on the therapist. Not everyone is easily hypnotized using 19th century command techniques. Freud grew frustrated that he couldn't get every patient into a deep enough state to be curable. There is a widely discussed historical theory regarding Freud's physical health. Freud was a heavy user of cocaine, which he initially praised as a miracle drug, and a lifelong cigar smoker. However, the chronic use of cocaine and tobacco led to severe jaw and gum disease, eventually resulting in oral cancer. Rumor has it that his dentures were bulky and ill-fitting, making it painful and physically difficult to speak for the long periods required to perform a braid-style fixation or repetitive induction. To bypass his own difficulty with hypnosis, Freud invented psychoanalysis. Instead of a trance, he had patients lie on a couch and free associate say whatever came to mind. He believed this would eventually leak the same subconscious information that hypnosis forced out. However, in doing so, Freud created a split in the field. He, along with Alfred Adler and Ernest Jones, focused on the long-term analytical talk cure, while unfortunately, hypnosis was pushed to the fringes of alternative medicine for decades. While Freud was building the movement of psychoanalysis, Joseph Breuer remained a proponent of the hypnotic, cathartic approach. Freud's ego and desire to lead a new movement meant that he often disparaged hypnosis as unreliable to elevate his own new theory. While Sigmund Freud was busy turning away from the instability of hypnosis to build the rigid structure of psychoanalysis, Carl Jung, initially Freud's crown prince, took a different path. Jung realized that the subconscious wasn't just a basement for repressed traumas, it was a vast landscape of symbols and archetypes. This shift in thinking provided the vocabulary that modern hypnotherapists, especially Milton Erickson, would eventually use to heal patients through imagery rather than just direct commands. It wasn't until the mid-20th century, with the arrival of Milton Erickson, that hypnosis regained the clinical respect Freud had stripped away. Erickson became the most famous hypnotherapist in history by moving away from the look into my eyes commands of the past. Erickson worked tirelessly with over 14 clients a day, 6 days a week. Erickson often used indirect suggestion. Instead of saying, "relax your arm," he might say, "I wonder if that left arm will become heavy before the right one does, or if they will both relax at the same time." This permissive approach gave the client's subconscious the choice, which bypassed the critical faculty, the part of the brain that wants to argue, question, and resist. Milton Erickson, though primarily a psychiatrist, was a Jungian in spirit. He understood that the subconscious communicates in metaphor. Erickson would tell a story about a fictional person, John, who overcame a problem. The client's subconscious would identify with the symbol of John, a Jungian archetype of the hero, and apply the solution to themselves without the conscious mind ever realizing it was being treated. Modern hypnotherapy often uses Jung's archetypes. For example, asking a client to meet their inner guide or step into their future self uses Jungian concepts to create a powerful, non-threatening hypnotic suggestion. Although a lot of modern-day hypnotherapists look up to Erickson and hail him as their hero, Erickson was very guarded about laymen using hypnosis and believed it should only be practiced by registered medical specialists such as doctors or psychiatrists. While Milton Erickson was the poet of hypnosis, Dave Ellman was certainly the engineer. He didn't come from a medical background. He, in fact, was a songwriter and radio host. However, his contribution to the field was so profound that he is often credited with single-handedly bringing hypnosis back into the medical and dental professions in the 1950s. Ellman's interest in hypnosis began at age 8. His father was dying of terminal cancer and was in agony. A family friend, a stage hypnotist, came to the house and within minutes had Ellman's father playing and laughing with his children, completely free of pain. This left a permanent mark on Ellman that hypnosis was not a trick, it was sheer mercy. Ellman provided what is still considered the most practical definition of hypnosis used by professionals today. Hypnosis is a state of mind in which the critical faculty of the human mind is bypassed and selective thinking is established. The critical faculty, the filter that compares new information to what you already believe. If I tell you you're a chicken, your critical faculty says, "No, I'm a human," and rejects the suggestion. And bypassing it, getting past that filter so the suggestion is accepted as reality. Ellman's greatest legacy is his induction process. In an era where eye fixation, Braid's method, could take 30 minutes, he didn't want to spend hours telling stories. He wanted results in minutes. Ellman developed a process that took under 4 minutes. It relies on 4 specific stages. Physical relaxation, which involves starting with the eyelids, the body's smallest muscle group. Fractionation, which is a technique of bringing the client back up out of hypnosis and straight away putting them back under repeatedly. Each time they go back, they go twice as deep. The hand drop, testing for catalepsy and physical evidence that the body is completely limp and unresponsive. And mental relaxation, or the number block as it's known, which involves having the client count backward from 100, dismissing the numbers until the mind is too tired to think of them. When the numbers are gone, the critical faculty is gone. Ellman used compliance tests. He didn't ask for relaxation, he tested for it. He would lift a patient's hand and let it drop like a wet rag. If the patient helped lift the hand, he knew they weren't in trance yet. This binary feedback, either they are in or they aren't, made his method perfect for the high-pressure environment of a surgical theatre or a dental chair. In 1964, he published his seminal book, Findings in Hypnosis, later retitled Hypnotherapy. It is still considered the Bible of rapid, direct hypnosis. While Erickson was working with the subconscious mind as a friend, Ellman was treating the subconscious mind as a computer that just needed the right code to be entered. The ideomotor phenomenon is a psychological phenomenon wherein a subject makes motions unconsciously. Also called ideomotor response or ideomotor reflex and abbreviated to IMR, it is a concept in hypnosis and psychological research. It is derived from the terms ideo, idea or mental representation, and motor, muscular action. The phrase is most commonly used in reference to the process whereby a thought or mental image brings about a seemingly reflexive or automatic muscular reaction, often of minuscule degree and potentially outside of the awareness of the subject. Leslie Lecron took the clinical work of his predecessors and added a high-tech communication system for the subconscious. Before Lecron, therapists mostly talked at the patient. Lecron found a way to let the patient talk back without waking up. Ideomotor signaling is the groundbreaking technique of using involuntary muscle movements, usually finger twitches, to represent yes, no, and I don't want to answer. It bypassed the critical conscious mind entirely, and it allowed for regression therapy. A therapist could ask the subconscious, is the cause of this fear related to an event before the age of 5? And get an instant, honest, physical response. Lecron also identified the 7 common subconscious reasons for physical illness: conflict, organ language, motivation, past experience, identification, self-punishment, and suggestion. In the 21st century, hypnosis has shed its magic and mystical reputation and entered the realm of clinical neuroscience. We have moved from observing what happens, behavior, to seeing where it happens, the brain. Thanks to functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and the electroencephalogram, EEG, technology, we can now prove that the hypnotic state is a distinct neurophysiological event. Modern neuroscience shows that hypnosis isn't sleep. It is a state of focalized attention combined with a decrease in peripheral awareness. When a person is in trance, 3 things happen in the brain. The anterior cingulate cortex, this is your conflict monitor. In hypnosis, activity here decreases. This is why you don't care if a suggestion is weird, like leaving your body and floating upwards. The brain stops checking for logic. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, this is your executive control network. It disconnects from the default mode network, the part of the brain used for daydreaming and self-talk. This creates the disconnection from the self that allows for that profound change work. The most significant 21st century shift is our understanding of neuroplasticity. We now know the brain is not hardwired after childhood. Hypnosis acts as a catalyst for neuroplasticity. When a person vividly imagines a new behavior in trance, the brain fires neurons as if the event is actually happening. Repeated enough, the brain creates new synaptic pathways, making the new behavior, like being a non-smoker, the default setting. We hope you found that interesting and inspiring. If you would like to know more about either training to be a hypnotherapist or if you are already a hypnotherapist and are looking to develop your skills, give us a thumbs up, follow us on social media, or visit our website. www.hypnotherapy-supervision-cpd.uk. You can also book a hypnotherapy session with the area's one and only dedicated hypnotherapy and hypnosis clinic, the Halifax Hypnotherapy Clinic. Just Google us, Halifax Hypnotherapy. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you again soon.